My name is Marcia. It is August 24th, 2024, and I am speaking with
Cecily McClellan.
And what is your connection to Black Bottom?
I was born in the area named Black Bottom. I grew up in Black Bottom, and my family stayed there probably until some of the last homes were being demolished. We didn't move out of Black Bottom until 1972.
Okay. And what's your family story of how they settled in Black Bottom or how they got to Detroit?
My family is from Kentucky. Both my mother and father are from Kentucky. As a result of, they were coal miners. My mother came up here first, and then my grandfather, who had worked in a coal mine in Tribute, Kentucky, the coal mine fell in on him, and it broke his back, so he couldn't work. And so my mother, as I said, my mother came up as the oldest daughter first in about 1947, and then probably very shortly thereafter, within a couple of years, the entire family moved from Tribute, Kentucky to Black Bottom. My father the same, but in a slightly different part of Kentucky. His family was primarily from Georgetown, Kentucky. And, everybody was coming here because of the opportunities, the belief in, more jobs, the auto industry, and so that's why they ended up here. My mother and father then got married in a relatively short period of time in 1948. My oldest brother was born in 48, so it's probably kind of like a rush to get married at that time. And we stayed in the bottom, moving around quite a bit, but we never moved out of the bottom. We lived at, like I said, when I was born, we were living at home on MacDougal. I've been told and even verified, I talked with Tom Barrow, and because I was told the story over time that we lived next door to the Barrow family, Joe Lewis family. And I asked Tom Barrow, did his family live at a home on MacDougal? And he said yes. And I told him that, well, we live next door to your home. That's where, when I was born, that's the home that I came to. And then from there we moved to Clinton, between St. Albans and Du Bois. We moved to, at one point, I think my father, who had gotten a job, got laid off, and so all of us had to move in with my grandmother, and she was staying on Madison between Shane and Joseph Campo. And we stayed there about a year until we my mother was able to find a home. She the one that actually found it. It was very crowded, probably during that time, the late 50s, in the bottom. People were really living on top of each other. And she had heard that somebody had died in this apartment on Du Bois. And so she went and found the landlord, and it happened to be a Jewish guy. And this person named Frank, that's all we knew because we heard the story over and over. Frank had died, and he had been in this apartment for some time, and he blew up because of the fluids, and I guess just the amount of time he had been deceased. Mm-hmm. And they had to literally take knives and poke it into his body and let the fluids out to get him through the doors. Because my mother and them always said the doors were a little smaller in the bottom in certain places, and the sinks were always lower to accommodate, she felt like other immigrants that were shorter. And my mother said she would go in there, she would clean it up. And so she literally went into that apartment building and cleaned the floors, mopped it up, got rid of any debris of Frank, okay? Mm-hmm. And we moved in. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, and so it was me. It was 5 of us, and so me and my older sister slept in bunk beds on one side of the room, and me and my 2 brothers slept on the other side, and my little sister slept with my parents. But we could always recall, whenever it was raining or it's thundering, we would always think about Frank or get scared. Mm-hmm. And literally, there were these Dutch people on the wallpaper, and my brother said he would always dream that they would be coming off the walls with knives But I guess it was just the hearing that story over and over and knowing what had happened in that apartment. We just had nightmares. We never did have good. We were always scared. Okay, and we moved on Madison. After that again, but we were in the house by ourselves at that time, and that was between Joseph Campo and Shane again. But it was very close to Joseph Campo. And we stayed there for several years. I kind of felt like we were kind of nomads, but we moved around. And then from there we moved on J Street. And that's where we probably spent, seemed like the longest time. It had to be like we moved on Waterloo, 2940 Waterloo. These edges I can remember now. And we stayed only on Waterloo for a year. And then we moved on the next block to J Street. And we were there from 1961 until 1972. So that was the longest period of time that we had really been in any of the residence that we stayed in. So we have a whole lot of memories of J Street. And I attended I went to Duffield Elementary. And when we moved on J is very close to Verna. And Verna, one side, I think Waterloo is a dividing line for Bunch. Bunch is on the other side of Verna. But J is like, the next block over. So I had to walk down to Duffield, which was like 10 blocks, to go to school to finish up at Duffield. And then when I completed Duffield, I went to Miller, and I started Miller in 64. And I just, school in general to me was always a joy. Mm-hmm. And just to back up a little bit, I remember when I went to Duffield, just the amount of the programs, the education. We always thought that maybe we were getting less of an education because we were in an area that was considered a poorer area. But I got German in the 3rd grade in Duffield Elementary. There was industrial art. There was homemaking. There was art. You had all these, different courses that folks don't even consider now. Literally, you had to learn to bake a cake. You had to be able to make a wooden object in industrial art. You really had to really learn all these things, using your hands as well as your mind. And Duffield was a pretty big school because we had, it said the low platoon, the high platoon, and the low platoon was from kindergarten to the 3rd grade, and the high platoon was from the 4th grade into the 6th grade, because at that time, we went up to the 6th grade. But as I said, I started Miller in 64, and I enjoyed school so much and was in every activity that I did not miss. I didn't miss school at all, okay? And I graduated with perfect attendance. As a matter of fact, they had a big snow in 65, okay? And I'm on J between Joseph Campo and McDougal. Miller, one side of it is on J too. So, I had to walk up. I was closer to McDougal, to Joseph Campo, and then to Shane. And it was about 2.5 blocks to Miller, but it was a huge snow. But I was going to school. I was determined. Couldn't hardly get out the house, but I was going to school. I walked up there to that school only to find out the school was closed, okay? But I was going to have perfect attendance.
You were dedicated.
I was dedicated. I was serious about it. I loved the school. And when I graduated in 67, which was the year of the rebellion, I went on to Eastern. And it was the new Eastern then. Although I wanted to go to the old Eastern so bad up there on the boulevard because I was looking forward to catching a bus. That was just going to be an excitement. Can I get on the bus? Okay. And they said no, but by that time they opened up the new Eastern in 1966 down on 3200 East Lafayette. So we're still living on J. So from J down to Lafayette is about 10, 11 blocks. And so, in the wintertime, that could be a nice, a chill, particularly when we were wearing really mini skirts. Mm. And it didn't make no difference. You wore your mini skirt and you still walked 11 blocks down to Lafayette to school. And it was just during a very turbulent time. It's during a time that I believe that I began to awaken as to what was going on in terms of, social justice, racism, and all that was going on here. I joined the Association of Black Students at Eastern King, and when Martin Luther King was assassinated, it was, we decided, I was a part of the group that decided that no, we got to do something. This is just not right. We need to turn this school out. It's just unfair what had happened. And so, we work with other students. It was a group of students that always was out in front of the building at Eastern at that time. And they would be, shooting craps or whatever, but they would be skipping classes. So we, got with those students to say, well, we need some people that's going to pull these fire alarms, okay? So, and, we purchased this stuff called skunk perfume. And, it had a foul smell to it. And so, we worked with the students that were outside and they didn't have no problems, okay? They was outside anyway. So, we, organized it, and then we said it was a bomb threat. And so they literally, the school was all turned out. Everybody had to get out the building. And at that point in time, and I remember the guy's name, his name was Rufus, he went up and took down the American flag. And we raised the red, black, and green flag, okay? And our principal was named Mr. Brand, and he was a white principal. He left and went out on leave. He never did come back. He never came back to the school, which was all right because at that point, they organized what was called this community committee, and it consisted of students, and I was one of the students, and it was teachers, Imani Humphrey, who was well known in the city. She opened up her own school called Aisha Shule later on, and my son did go there, and parents. And we screened the teachers. We screened the new principal to be hired. And we still, and at that time, Mr. Dobbs, was selected. Mr. Dobbs was the first principal, the first new principal of the Martin Luther King Junior Senior High School. And so, that was really a tremendous experience. So by the time I graduated, we had probably it flipped over totally, okay? Because I remember I was playing tennis, and when I got my letter, to give you a little certificate, my letter had E on it. It was still Eastern, okay? But when I took it to the knitting mills, it used to be a place where people would take their letters to get their, school sweaters made, and it was on right across from the Eastern Market. It's called the knitting mills. Then you take it there, and they would make you up a sweater. And my sweater had K on it, a big K, with the tennis, racks on them and stuff like that. But just living in that area, it was just a wonderful experience because, you really never really ventured outside of it. We would go downtown because literally we was close enough to walk downtown. But basically, you stayed in that area. And all of the stores on Joseph Campo, we had a Lieberman's, which was sold clothes and shoes and all those kind of little things. There was a Big Three supermarket, which was on Joseph Campo and Waterloo as well. That, a lot of people still had coal stoves, so there was a coal bin that was on J and Joseph Campo. There was, I remember it's a gas station that used to be on Antietam and Joseph Campo. There was another store, God, it just slips me, on Chestnut. Can't think of the name of it right now. But that store was, it was more of a neighborhood store. It still was owned by somebody that didn't, outside of the neighborhood, they weren't black. But you could go in there and run a tab up and then you pay it off, when you got your money. And then there was a place called Melodies, which appeared to be something like a gambling place. Because every once in a while when we were down there, we would see the police. Police would raid it, and everybody would run out of it on Joseph Campo and Chestnut. And then there was also a bar on Chestnut. On Maple, there was a smoke shop, and that was often just going up and down the street. I remember just hearing people say, "Well, that's the senator. That's Coleman. That's Coleman Young. That's the senator." And Coleman would literally be walking through the neighborhoods, okay? And I know that it was a smoke shop that he used to attend that was on the corner of Maple and Joseph Campo. And there was cleaners there. There was Across from there was a pool hall, and there was a drugstore. So I mean, pretty much it was self-contained. You know, on Shane you went over, there used to be the Calvert Theater, you know, and that was a big treat just to go to the show. And, you know, and you could stay in there and see it as long as you want, okay? So if you needed to see the movie over, you could stay in there. But it was the Calvert Theater, and you know, I remember Harvard that was right on the corner of Madison and St. Madison and Shane. But it was just an area that everybody knew everybody. And because I guess we moved around, and then we had quite a bit of family. You know, my grandmother had 9 surviving kids, my mother being the oldest. She had 11 altogether. And then, you know, they began to have kids, and they were still living in the bottom as well. So, you know, you had your whole, everybody's family lived down there. And some of my best memories, and I think about it, because it was me and my girlfriend, her name was Joanne Patterson. You know, youth could dance for money. You know, hey, whatever the record was, and you know, shake, like by Sam Cooke. I mean, you know, you could get out there and just dance, and you know, the older folks would always give you money to dance. And during the holidays, and I don't sense it anywhere now, it smelled like barbecue. The entire neighborhood. I mean, it was barbecue pits everywhere, so you knew it was the 4th of July or whatever holiday, but particularly the 4th of July. And music was everywhere. And so, you know, you just walk down the street, and if, you know, the Johnsons were having their little barbecue and they playing music, you could go in there and start dancing, and the folks would say, oh, go ahead and dance and give you some money. So you could make you a few quarters and 50 cents and even $1. But $1 back then was $1 for real. I mean, you know, because, I mean, I can remember going to the candy store and you buy 1 penny. You had these things called pea stones. They were red little hard candies. You can get 3 for a penny, okay? 3 cherries for a penny. 2 coconut cookies, small cookies for a penny. I mean, a penny made a difference, okay? Yeah, and so it you know, it just, you know, and we tell these stories to our kids, and you know, my son, particularly my youngest son, they just would just really wish for those times, saying, oh, that just sounds like such a wonderful, wonderful time. I say it was. I mean, you know, we was poor, but we didn't know it, and we began to show them pictures, you know, some pictures. We found some pictures that really showing about them. He said, y'all living in poverty. He said, wait a minute, this is the place. Okay, yeah, we had, you know, there were some areas where folks did not have grass, okay? And there were areas that people did have nice homes. And MacDougal was one of the better streets. And there were always people on the block that had maintained. But then there were a lot of people that were living in rental homes. And we happened to be a renter. Because all while we lived in the bottom, we never owned a home. We didn't own a home until my mother purchased a home over here on Calvert and Woodward. And that was the first home that we actually owned. And I think that there was a small, insignificant sniping that was given, you know, for people that were moving out. And it might have been $2,000, but I mean, that barely covered your cost to move. Let alone you wouldn't buy a down payment on the new home or any of all of that. So people were pretty much, you know, moved out, and many people didn't get those resources. And so that was clearly unfortunate, you know. And I have a video of the day we moved.
Oh, wow.
And I have an actual video. It made me think about I don't know if you ever seen the Beverly Hillbillies. You used to clamp it, and they had that truck. It was an open truck with all this stuff on it.
That was y'all?
That was us, okay? And this video shows us, you know, and I wasn't there because I happened to be at Oakland University, and I was, you know, I started there in 1970, and we moved in 72. And so that would have been 72. So in 71, when I came home for Christmas, okay, I told him, I said, I'm not coming back until y'all move. I ain't coming back home till we move. Because by this time they had moved so many people off of the blocks and out of the neighborhood that they were leaving dogs, So when you got off the bus, you had to worry about, just loose dogs in the neighborhood, because the houses was being tore down as you lived there, okay? In terms of just rodents, the rodents don't come where the heat is, okay? So everything is moving over to where you are. And then our furnace went out that last year that we were there, okay? I said, no, I'm not coming home. I'm staying up here for Christmas. I ain't coming home. It was bad. That particular year, that was the only really bad memory. But
there's some other places that come to mind that are significant to you from Black Bottom? Churches or other businesses? You started to mention some.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. I mean, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, growing up, there was a dance hall. Wasn't exactly in the bottom, but it was right outside. I mean, I don't even want to say outside because it was on Gratiot in St. Albans. As a matter of fact, that building still stands today. It was called a Mason Hall. And that's where you really went to, to dance. And I remember going there and not being quite old enough to get in at the time, because I think I might have been, it was 17 to get in. I might have been 13, 14, somewhere in that age. But I was a serious tomboy as well. Mm-hmm. And I literally used to jump out at the back, get out on the back of my house on the roof and jump down. And me and a girlfriend would go up to the Mason Hall and we would just dance, doing the Philly Dog, the Bop, whatever else was out at that time. But it was the Mason Hall, which is on the corner of Gratiot and St. Albans. There was a funeral home, and as I was talking to the fellow that was here just a moment ago, is a funeral home. We used to run up in there and just see. We would say we want to see the dead bodies. And the funeral home was called Bristol and Bristol. And Bristol was on Macomb and Joseph Campo. Mm-hmm. And we used to go up in Bristol and Bristol, just try to view the bodies. Okay, that was exciting for the day. And we also had, what is called the DeQuinda Cut. Used to be literally railroad tracks. And it was active. I mean, trains went up and down those tracks, okay? Mm-hmm. And it was an activity for us. We literally would get cardboard from Big Three Supermarket, and we would walk down to those railroad tracks. And, they had nice sized hills. We would find where the hills had the lowest drop into, off into where the tracks are. And, maybe, it might be would be quite 2 foot high. Because when you're coming down on that cardboard, you flying. You flying, okay? You fly right up into the tracks. And we always was told that when the trains come, you had to cover up because they're gonna shoot you with rock salt. We don't know where they come from, but we believe that. So when the trains would come, we had cardboard and we could cover up. But I mean, I had folks. I mean, we rode down those tracks, and often you get a little damage too. I had a girlfriend got cut. I mean, with a piece of glass coming down that track. But there were all type of businesses up and down. Joseph Campo, and also on Shane too. Shane. I mean, I remember there was a Romney supermarket, and you could go in there and get for a nickel 2 big gigantic separate popsicles. They would be in this pack, and you get 2 popsicles, okay? And it was a nickel. A candy bar was a nickel. And I'm talking about they big as the ones that they say the king size, that's the size they would be for a nickel back in the day. And Calvary Church, Calvary Church was right there across from Duffield. And so Calvary, moved, but Calvary is still down there. Calvary is down, I don't know if you know that big orange church. It's a big orange church. It's across from from King. Okay. It's a church, and it's made of metal. It looks like, but it has a slanted roof. But that's Calvary, and that Calvary moved from Joseph Campo and Clinton to on Lafayette across from Martin Luther King High School. Well, it was probably Eastern at that time. And so it was just a really joyful time, okay? So I can't think of anything else right now.
And you started to talk about your family having to move, and y'all having to move around. And so I'm assuming that's because y'all weren't ever able to buy a house in the area, that y'all had to.
Yeah, most houses were not for sale. Okay, almost, and I would say that a large proportion of the people that live down there were probably renters. Okay, because it was particularly during I would say the 40s and 50s. That was during the Great Migration, and when people were coming in from the South, they were coming into Black Bottom. Okay, because I used to also another thing we used to joke about is that people coming from the South would bring flying roaches. Okay, and because they would never last. You would see them for a period of time, but they would disappear. But these literally would have roaches that would fly. Okay, and folks thought we were crazy, but there are flying roaches down south, and so I guess when they migrate up here, some of them survived. Okay, and they wouldn't survive real long because it got pretty cold up here. Because I don't see any more flying. I don't see any roaches now. But yeah, So people, we're still trying to make a living, find a stable. My father was the only income. Having 5 kids, it could get difficult. Factories were off sometime. He worked for Chrysler. They would lay you off, and then call you back. So, that caused financial hardship. And it wasn't until when my mother started working at the post office, that those 2 incomes, I guess, began to build a little more stability. And, and that pretty much happened almost when we were probably our last 5 years living in the bottom, that my mother got, began to work at the post office. So.
And when y'all moved, is that when you moved into the house that your mom bought?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
and I should say my mom and dad bought at that time, because it was shortly, but sometime after that, then they divorced. Okay, so then it became just my mother's house. Okay. Yeah.
And can you share a little bit more about how did your family respond to learning about Black Bottom being destroyed? Like, how did they find out, or
how did they find out? I mean, we had living down there. You had already heard rumors that they're gonna tear down this area, and we had you had already witnessed portions of it already being torn down, coming from downtown, So we're over here, but you see that they're already demolishing areas that were, when I was born, they probably had already begun to dig out and demolish areas down right there. Where the freeway is now, but they had not demolished areas or homes that were, say, from Orleans, all the way up where the railroad tracks are kind of like St. Albans, and so folks were living all down in those areas, St. Albans, and so they were you were seeing them tear down homes on those sides. And literally, when they began to build the Lafayette Towers, we used to run through them. I mean, we used to play, and that was the area that we played in when they were building up the towers. Okay, so we knew that they were steadfastly coming over to build, and we often heard that they're gonna tear down this area eventually. They're gonna tear this area down, but we weren't trying to move. We stayed there, like I said, to the very end. We literally. On a block, I think that they might have torn down all but 2 structures, and I think I got a picture where I'm standing on top of where the kind of remains of where our house was. Okay. So,
and how do you remember the community responding to learning about it or just seeing it happening? Like, do you remember any conversations or anything?
I mean, people. I mean, were. I mean, how can I say? People were. I mean. Folks were in hope of, because there were also rumors that they were going to build new homes, because so many of the structures in the bottom were old homes. I mean, we're talking about homes. One of the homes that we lived in, it was still lanterns on the wall that literally used to be lit with gas lanterns. One of the houses we lived in on Madison still had the hookup for gas lanterns in the house. So the homes were old. Okay. It should have been, one, folks, if they had the opportunity, one, to purchase a home. So if they even owned a home, you would have at least had the opportunity, if you had to move, to get enough resources to purchase another dwelling if you had to move out the bottom. You had built up relationships. I mean, folks were very sad because now you're moving away from people that you have known for all your life. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that was one of the things about it is that, for instance, I'm walking from Jay down to Lafayette, and if you just thinking about that area, Vernon was the cutoff line. Although it was plenty of black folks on the other side, but it was Vernon. And what you had was Waterloo, Jay, Antietam, Chestnut, Maple, Mullet, Madison, Clinton, Macomb, Monroe, Lafayette. Okay, so I'm walking all those blocks every day. I'm seeing the same people. You begin to know when there's a stranger in the neighborhood. You look and say, they don't live here, okay? Mm-hmm. But I was in high school, and had little boyfriends, and they were scared to come down. I'm not coming down. No, whatever they thought. But one thing was for sure, if you brought somebody into that neighborhood, people knew they didn't live there, okay? It was because folks had lived there so long, and there was a lot of movement and congregation, a lot of families, that folks began to really know each other. And so, of course, it was a sadness when folks tore down. And often, you would see people come back, okay? They would come back to that area. We used to have, for a couple of years, we did a Black Bottom reunion. Mm-hmm. And we did it on Joseph Campo, where it used to be a pool hall on Joseph Campo and Maple. And if I haven't thrown away, because they did feature it in the paper, the Black Bottom reunion. So, it's area that people really, felt, really akin to each other, had a camaraderie, a shared history, because everybody was coming from someplace else or running from something in the South. And this was the new so-called promised land where things were going to be a little bit better than from whence they come. Mm-hmm. And, and we know just the history of the South, there's truth to that. It just wasn't necessarily the promised land because you're still living in an area that was deficient in many ways. Mm-hmm. So I think it was a sadness because you were losing your friends, your neighbors, the promise that you would have first opportunity at the new houses. And some of that did happen, the Ralph Bunch, because I did live there for a period when they built that. There were literally some people that had moved out of Black Bottom into the Ralph Bunch. Some families that are still living in the Ralph Bunch homes that moved directly out of the home that was demolished in Black Bottom. So,
wow.
And I moved over there a little later in my life. And, and only the Martin Luther Kings. But there was never any real effort made to build homes so people could actually come back in that area, okay? Or to give folks money to even refurbish or try to fix up the area in which they lived in, okay? That didn't happen. And there was no real money given so people could relocate. Or if they own their homes, as few did, but when they own their home, they would give a minimum amount of dollars. If anything, it was barely enough to make a down payment on a new home if you had to move out. Mm-hmm. But it's a beloved area because, it's the roots, it's the connection between, when you talk to somebody, when they talk about moving from the South, a large number of those people are going to say they moved into that Lower East Side. That's where they moved in at. Mm-hmm. But we also recognize that we weren't the first, we was migrating, but there were a lot of immigrants. Because when I remember when we lived on Madison, there was a German lady, and she didn't speak, she didn't talk really good English, or she had such a heavy accent, because we used to do little things for her, and she would give us some shortbread. We always, I think it was old. Did she bring this over from Germany? It was, but she was dressed in black, and she was down there. And she always appeared to be so lonely. We said, now why did they run off and leave her? Why is she still here? You know? So, I mean, you know, you had, it was the place that other immigrants had came in, be it Germans, be it Jews, the other people. Okay, by the time we came to come into that area, and I think that happened really around, probably the big migrations were starting around the 30s, you know, late 20s, 30s, when, you know, you start having a saturation of black folks in that area. I, for one, and this has always been my opinion, have a problem with them saying that it's the black bottom because of the dirt. Okay, I just find that extremely interesting, because I never heard it called a black bottom when the Italians were staying there. It wasn't called a black bottom when Jews were living in that area. It was called a black bottom when black folks were staying there. Okay, and I just find it interesting that they want to say that now it's not that because it was the black folks, is that because the dirt was rich. Okay. It's just interesting now. They never talked about it. If it was a black bottom when the dirt was rich, when the Italians was there, why wasn't it the black bottom?
That's a good question.
Yeah. So we always connected the two who lived there. Nobody knew, and up until recently, I was grown before I heard anything about that dirt. Okay. I heard nothing about that dirt. All right.
What do you think the present day, what do you think is the impact of the destruction of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley on Black Detroiters today?
I mean, I think that it destroyed the potential of generational wealth, okay? If there had been a political structure downtown that could have been favorable, you know, to, say, Paradise Valley or Hastings Streets, then investments could have been made in those folks, you know, upgrading, you know, improving their business. That was a major thoroughfare. I mean, you know, in terms of, you know, stores, nightclubs, all of that stuff was all up on Hastings. My mother worked in a restaurant on Hastings. So, I mean, if opportunity was provided, those people could have improved or their businesses on Hastings, you know, or the area on Hastings, and it would have allowed them to then, you know, turn those businesses over to their kids. And then those kids could have, you know, built, I mean, it would have built some opportunity for generational wealth, okay? If there were going to be some destruction because of deterioration in neighborhoods, then the people living in that area should have had an opportunity to move in that area, stay in those homes, okay? Those opportunities were not provided. It just scattered, you know, folks, okay? It scattered. I mean, we haven't seen anything like that since, where you have the opportunity where you can go in an area where people own the businesses. It's basically a very strong ethnic group, and they're able to turn those businesses or those homes into wealth for generations to come for their family.
And what do you see, a part of why we're doing these interviews is because of the I-375 project, and we want to make sure that the voices and perspectives of folks who lived in Black Bottom or who own businesses in Paradise Valley are a part of how we think about the future of this 30 acres of land that they're saying will be available for development. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what could be on those 30 acres as a way of repairing some of the harm that was done?
I think on the 30 acres there should be some affordable housing. I mean really affordable housing, okay? Not saying necessarily need to build projects, but they need to build housing that moderate and even have, you know, access for lower income people. That needs to take place inside of that area. I think there needs to be an actual reach out and effort for persons to start some type of businesses in those particular, in that area. And there needs to be some acknowledgement historically of what that area was. I mean, I think I would like to see some type of plaques or monuments or something to identify some of the history that, that existed in that area. Yeah.
And then what do you think is most important for future generations to remember about Black Bottom and Paradise Valley?
I think that they need to know that in terms of the migration, particularly of African Americans, that Black Bottom was a strategic in that sense. It was the place that many people leaving the South found comfort in when they arrived here from wherever they came from. And a lot of people came from Alabama. Detroit appeared to be probably one of the more strategic places, Alabama, Kentucky, because you're closer on that line if you look at 75. And if you look at Chicago, you find that a lot of more people are from Mississippi. Mm-hmm. But, as a part of our history in the great migration of African Americans from the lower South, that the Black Bottom was an integral part of that, and folks coming up from the South. And I think it served that purpose more than once, because, the Second Baptist, the historical Underground Railroad, mm-hmm. okay, when we go back prior to the 1860s, right there on Monroe and, what is that? It's that Bobian, but, it's right there in the middle of Greektown.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You talking about Second Baptist?
Yes,
mm-hmm. Second
Baptist Church. So, it's that history is there as well. And so, folks that were leaving and trying to get out of slavery 100 years before, the migration from Jim Crow. Because the second wave was really Jim Crow. The first wave was trying to get away from slavery. The second one was Jim Crow. And, and the Black Bottom was very instrumental in that area. And, folks learned to really live together because, like I shared with you a little bit earlier, it was a period of time that, both my mother and my grandmother, we were all living in a very small house. Because, my mother, all of us was living in one room in my grandmother's and my grandfather's house, if he hadn't passed by then. But all of us was living, so whenever things got hard or tough, or folks needed to leave from the South and come north, then often the Lower East Side was the area that they came to, and it was a friendly area that they could come to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then why do you think it's important for us to remember these histories?
History is his story, okay? It's your story, okay? And just like, it's very cliche, but, a tree can't grow without roots, and you can't grow without knowing from whence you come. And if you got a strong foundation and know from whence you come, what made you up, where you come from, you have a greater, to me, a better opportunity of carving out a place better in your path, in your future, and particularly in this country. If you don't know the history of this country, you could be confronted with a lot of prejudice, a lot of ills, a lot of situations that if you're not, if you don't know where you come from, then often, you'll be confused and not know how to contend or deal with them.
Right.
But if your family gives you a strong foundation of the history of the path of your people and what it means to you and where you lived at and how you all survived, that gives you a greater opportunity to me to build a better path and a future for you and your children.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then is there anything else that you want to get on record that we didn't talk about?
Just that I'm absolutely elated and glad that you all are doing this. We often, like I said, we talked about Black Bottom and, we reminisce on Black Bottom, but to see that it's, documented, that it's an area that, will not be just mowed over. Mm-hmm. And it appeared that was clearly what was going on. And this is now beginning to validate that, hey, this is where we live. This is the area that, my ancestors, began to make possible for us to be here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that this is happening.
Thank you.
Yeah.